So good afternoon, everyone. This is Julie Duckbill from the California Comprehensive Center here at WestEd, and we are a partner in the Secondary Literacy Partnership. Welcome to today's, I think it's a third in the series. And this webinar, as we said, is on the CSS Aligned Special Education Inclusive Differentiation. I'm just going to quickly, we've reviewed the housekeeping previously with you. I just want to remind you that we did some polls. If you need a private message, please text me to panelists only. Many of you have already maximized your chat so you could be with us today. So as I go through this, I would like to ask Stacy Greer from the California Department of Education, that's a partner in this, to give us some overview about the Secondary Literacy Partnership and introduce our presenters. Stacy?
Good afternoon. This is Stacy. Can you hear me okay, Julie?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Great. Well, my name is Stacy Greer, and I work for the California Department of Education, and we are a partner in the Secondary Literacy Partnership, along with the Association of California School Administrators, the California Teachers Association, and the California Comprehensive Center at WestEd. And we are really thrilled to be working together. This is actually our 14th year working together. Many of you may have been part of one of these webinar series. This is our third year of hosting these webinars on the Common Core implementation. Previous to these webinar series, we had an annual summit that we do on occasion. But we're really thrilled today to be able to offer you this webinar on looking at how the Common Core relates to students who have special needs. And we're thrilled that one of our leading members, Ellen Gervais, is going to be a leading presenter here. So I'd like to turn it over to Ellen to introduce the rest of the panelists. So thank you.
Ellen, over to you.
Oh, okay. I thought Sylvia was going to go first, but I'll be glad to go.
Okay, well I can
Sylvia.
step in, Ellen. Okay, I'm Sylvia DeRuvo, and Ellen is definitely a main presenter today, but I'll just introduce myself. I'm Sylvia DeRuvo. I used to be with the California Comprehensive Center. I am with WestEd Learning Innovations. I live in Georgia. Our office is our Learning Innovations offices are in Boston and Vermont. And I am a former special education teacher. I worked in California and taught there for about 20 years, and have done a lot of work around inclusive practices and response to intervention, having actually worked in Downey since 2012. So I'm excited to hear the teachers share their experiences as co-teachers as an option or as a service delivery option for students with disabilities to receive Common Core instruction. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thanks, Sylvia. Hi, participants. I'm Ellen Gervais. As Stacy Greer mentioned, I am a member of the Secondary Literacy Partnership Leadership Team. I represent the California Teachers Association. I also serve as a collaboration coach in Downey Unified School District. And by the way, Downey Unified has been making great strides implementing the inclusive model at the secondary level. I'd like to introduce you to our voices from the field. We're very fortunate today to have two voices from the field to share their classroom experiences implementing co-teaching. Both Jackie Hamano and Drew Belikoff are 7th grade teachers at Sussman Middle School in Downey. This is the second year they have been co-teaching. Sussman Middle School has a co-teaching team established at all 3 grade levels, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And now we'd like to know a little bit about your role. So if Anu will push out that multiple choice poll, I'd appreciate it if everyone would please indicate what their role is in their district right now.
And thanks, Ellen. And if you're other, just type in the chat if you already haven't done so. Many of you already introduced yourselves, so if it's the other and you haven't done, just use the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. It looks like we have 9% of people have said they're district administrators. 3% of school administrators. We have district and state coaches. Most of the folks have said, 14% have said special ed. excuse me, and many have said other. So thank you for typing in. We have assistant technology consultants, teacher educators at the university level, coordinators, county coordinators, SELPA program specialists. So thank you so much, everyone, for doing that poll.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our content this evening because, or it's evening here, sorry, this afternoon, because there's a lot to cover, and we definitely want to leave enough time for Drew and for Jackie to really get to share their experiences as a co-teaching team and the benefits that they've seen, some of the issues that they face, and the benefits that students have received from this particular model and being able to access the Common Core standard. So we're going to really be just briefly talking about the Common Core standards. And I know that this is a third in this series, so it's not anything new to what the Common Core is. I think we'll be looking at it in a slightly different lens and looking at it from the special ed teacher perspective. We're also going to look at just some of those pedagogical differences that really the Common Core allow us to use with students with disabilities and all learners, including English learners. And I saw someone's question was, well, how do we teach students with disabilities who are also English learners? And I think when we look at some of the universal design for learning concepts that we'll be discussing tonight, we will be meeting the needs of all learners. And then also, Ellen will be talking about that continuum of differentiated inclusive practice, looking at the different models of co-teaching, because there is a lot of confusion about what co-teaching is. There's a sense that it's team teaching, and there really are multiple models of co-teaching. And then also look at strategies that these co-teachers who were co-teaching today will be able to share strategies that they're using in their classroom. So quickly, as we look at, I do, and I just forwarded the slide. Did that happen for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Again, this is a third in a series, so you are probably familiar with the Common Core. But I think when we look at the reasons behind the Common Core, this kind of goes back to universal design for learning. What's the rationale for why we made the switch to the Common Core? And I think the statement really makes very clear the reasons that the Chief State School Officers and the Governors Association said we need to do something different as far as standards go from state to state. This was a quote made by David Coleman in his document, Bridging the Common Core to Life, when he presented the Common Core in April of 2011. And, the deep challenges were really the inequality of opportunity that students experienced as they moved around the country. And so there was this drive to come to common expectations across the different states because there was huge disparity. When students would take their state assessment in their state, you might have 87% proficient. But when compared to the NAEP, we might only, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, have only 36% proficient. And yet states were having to turn in their annual progress and determining if they made AYP based upon their state assessments. And states that had less rigorous assessments would do better. And this disparity created some issues, and that was why state leaders recognized that we need some commonality from state to state. And I will say in a comparison that was done probably in 2009, California always has had some of the most rigorous standards. When we looked at those states that had the smallest gaps between the NAEP and their state standards, California was in the top 10 for rigorous standards. So if you thought they were hard, yes, they are hard. But that rigor is going to allow you, as you move to the Common Core, find that there are not huge significant differences. And in my own eyes, I see the Common Core as a way to teach deeper the things that are truly important. So that's some of the thinking behind why we needed to change the Common Core. I think it's really important to note Let me make sure that I can move this slide. It's really important to note that the Common Core was not developed in the U.S. Department of Education. It is not a curriculum that was developed at the U.S. Department of Education, and there's been a lot of confusion nationally around that. It truly was built by a multi-state collaborative that included teachers. It was a broad group of stakeholders that really recognized the need for rigorous standards, universal design for learning, clear consistency from state to state with a logical progression. I do think that some of the bad press has come from the fact that maybe we didn't have enough stakeholder involvement in the initial planning, not enough teachers to be able to provide feedback maybe, but I think there is just this misconception out there that this is a curriculum that was developed in the U.S. Department of Ed, and it is not a curriculum. The development of the Common Core was done through this multi-state collaborative, but the curriculum aligned to it really is a local issue, so that may be a local school district or maybe a local state. So the goal truly was this coherence from state to state in recognizing what the important knowledge and skills are for college and career readiness.
Oh, fuck.
And I know that you are probably very familiar with the shifts in the Common Core, but I think these shifts are also a gift to students with disabilities because of this balance of informational and literary text. I know in my own experience as a special education teacher, students could grasp concrete textual evidence. If they can identify, you know, what evidence makes it clear in this text that a whale is a mammal, well, I can go back in the text and find that. They struggled much more, as all of you know out there as special educators, with that inferential thinking. Go back into the text and identify the theme. And I can remember students holding their hand open and saying, I can't hold the theme. And that was very, very difficult and confusing for them. So I think this focus on informational text, using informational text to build knowledge in the disciplines is a way that students with disabilities can grasp. They can't really touch a theme, and I think that has always been an issue. There is that staircase of complexity that allows access for students who are struggling and maybe are not right at the grade level standard yet, but because of that staircase of complexity, they are working on a part of the grade level standard. And I just briefly looked at integrations, knowledge, and ideas, and I looked at the 6th grade standard of distinguishing fact, opinion, and reasoned judgment in a text, whereas the 10th grade, 9th and 10th grade was using reasoning and evidence. And I think it'd be very easy to write a goal focused on reasoned judgment that was a 8th grade standard, but is also in that staircase of complexity addressed in 9th grade. And so I think when we think about IEP goals for students with disabilities, the Common Core allows, because of that staircase of complexity, allows a little more flexibility in writing those goals. And then, again, as I said, text-based answers. My students were always like, it's in the text, and then they knew they could go do that. Being able to write from multiple sources and using evidence in the text, and then the focus on academic vocabulary, which all students need. In math, I think, again, this focus on arithmetic in the primary grades, a focus on conceptual understanding of concepts rather than having to memorize algorithms, because we know that nearly every disability has an issue focused on where executive functions are affected and memory becomes an issue. But if a student has a deep understanding of the concept and has fluidity with their facts, with the arithmetic, then they are able to find multiple ways to solve a problem. And as you all know, there are those days when the students can, you know, they've got those times tables down, that learner variability piece, and then there are days when they just can't recall those facts. But if they can understand conceptually that multiple addition actually is multiplication, I can go back to adding, which I can do today. Can't multiply today, but I can add because I conceptually understand what I'm doing. So that deep understanding and being able to apply that understanding is really the way that kids learn and truly benefit students with disabilities. So I think, you know, and this actually comes from the California Common Core State Standards Handbook. It talks about, you know, the standards need to be read in a broad way so that we can look at the widest possible range of students who can participate. As I mentioned, a student in 10th grade might be working on a 10th grade standard, but is able to recognize fact from opinion and be working on that 10th grade standard in a flexible way. So I think it's important that we see the broad way to access the standards, and then with appropriate accommodations, we can ensure that students are participating in the Common Core. So let's take just a quick write, and I'm trying to stay on time here. Let's do a quick write and have you in the chat box just respond to how your own school or district is working to ensure access to the Common Core for students with disabilities and English learners.
Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, folks, please, we appreciate your own expertise. We use these pause times so you could learn with and from one another, and so we will pause here to take your input.
Yes. Oh, there's Liz. Okay. Okay, so Liz is working on the alignment of for the moderate to profound group. Oh, that's great. Okay, so what I'm seeing is some are using the Common Core for, or Michelle was saying they're using Common Core to develop IEP goals, which is great. That sets the foundation for high expectations. Jennifer is saying, you know, they're pushing general ed placement as much as possible and have embraced the collaborative teaching model. That's great to hear. Writing standards aligned goals in the IEPs. IEP development, goal writing using the Common Core. Oh, this is exciting. That's kind of one of my passions, believe it or not, writing IEP goals. Some are using Sandy, which is an online goal writing system to help. Okay, aligning goals to the Common Core. We use Goalbook. Goalbook is a great tool to inform IEPs. Okay, some want training on standards aligned goals. That's great. And co-teaching. So I think those are all excellent ways. Common Core integrated into daily lessons. Math and science teachers being trained. Technology integration in a variety of classes. Oh, excellent. Sounds like there's some great things going on in California. Well, Julie, to stay on time, should I keep moving?
Yes, please, Sylvia. Thank you. I really keep the chat going, and Sylvia will keep on going here. Thank you, everyone, for typing into the chat. There's so much great conversation, and it's great to see those who are sharing and doing similar things or different things. So thank you so much for typing in and giving us your expertise. And we'll keep moving. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, this is really wonderful. I think that the chat really gives us a sense of what's happening in California. That's great. So as we look at, let me make sure every time I click out of the box. You know, how do we build accessibility? And I can tell from the chat already that several of you are using collaborative teaching models. Several of you are using the Common Core in your daily instruction, and that's really what we're looking at now. You know, how do we build the Common Core, which are rigorous standards? How do we build those standards into our daily instruction? And I'm so glad to see how many people are saying, you know, we've got those anchor standards, we're using them in our class, we're using accommodations, because that's exactly what we're talking about. When we're using universal design for learning as a framework for your planning, it really is reducing the barriers that have been in place in the past that allowed your students that access to the curriculum. And, you know, in the old days when it was, you know, listen to a teacher talk and go read the book and answer the questions in the back, we knew that students with disabilities, very few could access that, because we know that in 80% of the time, students with a learning disability have a reading disability, and so that reading part was difficult. Auditory processing disorder, so listening to a teacher and taking that information in and making meaning of it was very difficult. Students with dysgraphia couldn't copy and take notes as quickly as everyone else, and so would just simply fall behind because of how the content was delivered. So universal design is really about looking at a different way to deliver that content. So it looks at multiple means of providing the content. That is that multiple means of representation. And I'm sure, you know, most of you have a smartboard and have seen how providing visual in addition to auditory, in addition to being able to talk about that multiple means of expression and action, are ways that students remember what they're learning. And we find those things alone are engaging so that students continue to be connected to the teaching and actually are learning. And when you're planning instruction in that way, recognizing we have a variety of learners in the classroom, that some of them do learn by listening. Some really like to just listen and learn, but others definitely need to get their hands into it. So that in your planning, you're looking at representation, expression, and action. And you see here, this is a link to an incredible video with David Rose, founder of TAFT. And he talks about, in this video, the myth of the average learner. And I think he makes a very strong point in this video that, you know, if it was the myth of the average shoe size, and we said the average shoe size is 8.5, men's 8.5, well, men who had size 8.5 feet would probably do very well at running. But those of us with smaller feet would probably not do so well with those shoes falling off of us. And my son, who has a size 13 foot, wouldn't do very well at all because he couldn't get his foot into it. And so when we can see that variability in shoe size, we obviously change shoe sizes to fit that need. But in the brain, we don't really see that change, that learner variability. And that's, unfortunately, we design our learning environments where we ignore that learner variability. And really, as he says, our greatest asset, which is our learner diversity. So I think this is, you know, a way to think about, you know, if you teach one way in your classroom, you're maybe meeting those kids who have the 8.5 shoe size, but you're not meeting the needs or allowing them to access the core for the students with the smaller or the bigger foot. Because how would you fare in an 8.5 shoe size world? So when we see variability, we design for it, but we can't see it in the brain, and therefore, unfortunately, we usually don't design for it. So he says that, you know, what we do know from brain research is that learning truly is way more variable than a lot of people assume, and that understanding learner variability is critical when you're thinking of designing the next generation of learning environments and really designing that next classroom lesson that you're going to present. So I'd like you to just think for a minute about that 8.5 shoe size, or that middle kid in your classroom that is learning from the way you deliver instruction. But how are we also meeting the needs of those kids with the smaller shoe size, or the smaller foot size or larger foot size? How are you addressing learner variability in your own classroom? And again, if you can just think about this and then write your responses in the chat box. And I saw Anu did put in the chat there. If you didn't get to watch this video, there is a link for it in the, let's see, you said link to the web page for this webinar. Okay, great. We're starting to get some responses. Using a technology app, Bookshare for reading the text. Let's see. If you know what Bookshare is, click on the green arrow, which is right down in the there's a bottom panel toward the bottom of your screen. If you know what Bookshare is, if you've used Bookshare, I'm going to say I know what it is.
Right, David writes, teaming up, but that can be a challenge too. Megan writes, I provide multiple scaffold sentences for responses in writing and conversation. Simone says, implementing UDL using technology. Jeff says, depth of complex icons, thinking maps, IEB partners, technologies, etc.
Perfect. That's exactly what we're talking about. Excellent. So I'm going to. Oh, go ahead.
Sylvia, to your question about Bookshare, of the 94 people on the call, 12 have said yes, 5 have said no. We'll post the URL into the chat about that. So
that would be wonderful. Here. Okay, and I will keep going. All right. Thank you, Julie. Well, when we look at learner variability, and from what a number of you said, you've already recognized, you know, when we look at that variability, we need to provide access to all learners. So I'm going to move to this quickly. When we're really looking at the variability of the brain, we have recognition networks, strategic networks, and affective networks. And when we're looking at the recognition network, really the what of learning, we're looking at multiple means of representation. And so many of you already do that, but here are just some examples of, as you are thinking about planning this lesson, when I say read something to my class, how will I support the learner that simply will just look at that page? Oh, I can have them underline. I can have them highlight keywords. I can allow them to doodle right in the margin, actively be involved in the reading. I can provide multiple media formats. Say read it, watch it, listen to it. I'm going to definitely chunk the information, use graphic organizers, provide multiple examples, and then support the background context. And I think especially when we're talking about English learners, that's an essential piece of supporting that background context for them to be able to understand the vocabulary. So as we move on, as you think about these, it'd be great if you can write some of these ideas in the chat box where you have provided multiple means of representation, multiple ways to deliver that content to the student, focusing on them being able to taste it and smell it and touch it and understand it and manipulate it. And that's what we talk about, the conceptual understanding of math, being able to decompose numbers to really know what they are. That's that what part of learning. All right. And then if we take a look at, so as you're thinking about that, you can type this in the chat box. What are some of the things that you do that allows students to access that content? Multiple means of action and expression really just are about how the student then is able to show you what they know. So multimedia for the student's expression. Can they make a video? Can they make an audio? Can they make a movie for you? It's really the how of the learning. The concept map to give them a visual picture. Creating checklists for them to be able to monitor their own learning. Providing them with an exemplar. So when they come to you and say, okay, I've finished my paper, and you say, okay, here's an exemplar, you go back to your desk and you look at how these two are alike and where they are different, and you monitor what else you need to change and fix on that. And then I think that, you know, peer tutoring, cooperative learning, that's really a part of this how of learning, along with assessment rubrics for students, so that they are looking at their own work and assessing their own progress and have they met the mark. And that's that part of the brain that we're focusing on, that is really the strategic network. How do I learn this? How do I best do this? And then lastly, and I just think for all of you who are teaching middle school or high school, this is not only important for them, but at that age, they really need to have a reason to be doing what you've asked them to do. And so it's age-appropriate activities, relevant, culturally relevant activities, age-appropriate relevant activities, with multiple, you know, I think of a menu of options for them to show you what they know. Some structure that includes charts and schedules and visible timers, giving them, you know, you have 7 minutes to do this work, to answer this question. And I will say that, you know, sometimes students aren't real engaged, and we have to create curiosity for them. I had a really good teacher in Sacramento once. I walked in the room and she was doing an opening activity, and she just made the statement, all cells are permeable, prove me right or prove me wrong. She created a sense of curiosity. They wanted, of course, to prove her wrong. They got into that textbook like I had never seen them before. They actually, for the first time, recognized there was a glossary in the book that helped them find what it was they were looking for. So that was a way to engage them into the learning. And I think that that is truly important if we want students to be able to really hang on to what it is that we're teaching them.
Sylvia, just a time check, we're about 3 minutes behind, so this is perfect.
Okay.
We had a really interesting question, and I think it's from Chris. Was saying, is it okay to modify and simplify text, reduce passive sentences, words, and techniques? You know, there's this rigor that you want from the text, and then there's the scaffolding question. So the balancing between, you know, really deconstructing text as it is presented versus simplifying. And I'm sure that you've come across that question.
And I think that when we go and look at here, I'm going to get back to my, when we're really looking at the how of learning, it's helping students to see how do I attack this text that is way beyond me. What is it that I do? How do I break it down? How do I simplify it into what I understand? And I think teaching them those strategies really is part of this strategic network so that they can do it on their own at some point. So yes, it's really important to simplify. I think you go back to what is the standard. Is the standard in that science class, you know, is it about being able to use that text to identify the evidence, you know, to determine is it a fact or is it an opinion? It's really about the goal, not the reading level at that point. So I think always go back to what is the standard we're teaching right here. That will help you as you determine, is this a place where I can simplify the text?
Yeah, and Kelly wrote, don't teachers need to be, right, thank you. And Kelly wrote, don't teachers need to be careful of modifications versus accommodations depending on student goals?
And I think that's a really, really good question. Again, it's depending on the student goal, but it's also the goal of that particular lesson. You know, and I'll always go back to things that my students struggled with. You know, I want the teacher would say, I want you to respond to, you know, identify and write a paragraph on the 3 main causes of the Civil War, and make sure you use correct punctuation, indentation, spelling. And I would go back and say to the teacher, okay, what is the goal of this lesson? Do you want to know the causes of the Civil War, or is this a grammar, handwriting, and English paper writing lesson? I mean, what is the goal here? Oh, well, I really want to know, do they know the main causes of the Civil War? Well, then let's take that other stuff off and say he can respond to you with bullet points, he can come up and tell you, he can record it, he can draw it, he can film it. But the 3-paragraph essay is not really the goal for this particular lesson. So I think if you think about that as you're faced with, am I modifying, is the modification going to actually change the goal that I'm working on? Well, then it's a modification. We do need to be careful. But if the modification is allowing them to show you what they know in that content area, then it's not really going to change. You're going to grade him on if he knew the 3 main causes of the Civil War, not the paragraph. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I know we could have a deeper conversation with this, and I think it's really interesting. And I'm inviting the presentation, the participants to keep sharing this. And in light of time, we'll keep on moving. But please use the chat to reflect and give your own reflections and responses. And Sylvia, I know you'll jump back into the chat as we handing over to Ellen, correct?
Yes.
And Ellen, would you like us to push out, Sylvia, to push out your slides for you, or would you like to do that?
Oh, I'll do that myself. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, so we're going to pass you the blue and green ball. And as they say, the ball's in your court, Ellen. And if you need any help, let us know, because sometimes it's hard to do both, but there you are.
Thank you so much. Well, Sylvia, I appreciate the valuable and insightful information you shared with everyone. It was terrific. Taking a look at this slide, what does shared responsibility look like? Well, the students become our students and not your students. Professional development opportunities include all teachers, general ed teachers, as well as occasionally excluded special ed teachers. All students are considered general ed students first. In fact, the general ed classes become the default setting for all students as appropriate. And finally, shared responsibility means equal access to the Common Core in preparation for college and career readiness, as well as the high-stakes Smarter Balance Assessment, which all students are required to take. This slide points out important research studies about inclusion from accredited institutions. It concluded that inclusion in a general ed setting improves outcomes for all students, including the students with disabilities. So for this quick write, what inclusion options are available to students with disabilities in your school or district? I'd like you to please consider these possible options: consultative supports, collaborative supports, school-wide multi-tiered system of support like RTI, intensive special education support, as well as co-teaching supports. If you just put down in the chat box some of the different supports that you're using in your school or your district now.
Someone writes, whatever's written in their IEP. Another person wrote, what we have all the supports you just described. I'm looking at for some other responses to this, Ellen. Co-teaching and school-wide. Simon just wrote, my district uses co-teaching, push-in service, and school-wide interventions. Thank you, Lily. All of the supports you mentioned and listed. Collaborative inclusion, RTI model. Thank you. RTI, specialized academic instruction in a general ed classroom consultation. Thank you. You can see them all flowing by there. Thank you. Inclusion is something we're working towards. Co-teaching in the humanities and algebra classes, an academic RTI. Thank you. Lots of great responses to that question, Ellen.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous, and I'm delighted to see the variety. So what are some lessons from the most successful districts? Well, the American Institute for Research completed this study in 2011, which focused on the achievement of students with disabilities on the CSTs, the California Standards Test. This is interesting. They found that successful districts are more likely to structure their programs so that students with disabilities are included and have access to the core curriculum. They establish systems for regular and structured collaboration between general and special ed teachers, not just collaboration on the fly in the parking lot, but collaboration that is valid and it's sharing information or responding to concerns. It's structured to ensure that students are achieving success. A big part of the instructional approach is continuous evaluation of what's occurring, and classroom teachers do this routinely. Assessment and continuous progress monitoring are built in so that changes to instruction can be made in a timely manner in order to avoid student failure. Our professional development is based on data, it's planned, it's focused, and it's timely. It's got to be relevant to the classroom situation. And finally, there's an understanding and an appreciation for the value of explicit, direct instruction. So, are you implementing a co-teaching strategy in your school or your district yet? If so, is it school-wide? Is it district-wide? Is it a pilot program? If you are implementing co-teaching, please put a mark the green check at the bottom. If you are not doing any co-teaching in your school or your district, mark the X.
And as Carla writes, very little inclusion for our severe students in general ed. And I'm looking at the poll for you at the bottom, Ellen. Quick poll. Of the 89 people on the call, 20 have said yes and 5 have said not yet. So we'll just clear that poll. And looking at the time, we're about 3 minutes behind. Don't want to rush you, but just we'll give you a heads up.
Moving right along, Julie. Thank you. This link was sent out prior to the webinar. If you watched it, you're going to have a greater knowledge of the 6 co-teaching practices. And if you haven't watched it, be sure to follow the link after the webinar, and you can get some greater insight into the different co-teaching practices. So here are the 6 co-teaching practices. 5 of the following 6 co-teaching practices were identified in the research as those most commonly utilized in a co-taught classroom. The 6th one teach, one observe, which is the second bullet from the top, that's the exception, and that'll be discussed shortly. This slide provides a visual model of the co-teaching configurations that are commonly used. The students are represented by the round pegs, the teachers are the blue triangles, and I want to say a special thanks to Stacy Greer from the California Department of Education for creating this graphic. Taking a look at each separate co-teaching model, the first one, which also happens to be the most common, is one teach, one assist. This co-teaching model has one teacher leading the direct instruction as the other teacher walks around assisting students or groups of students who need some help. The one teach, one assist model represents the most commonly implemented co-teaching model. It requires little or no joint planning time. Although one teach, one assist has value, it's often overused. So, do you use this in your classroom? If you use it or have been involved in this, will you click on the green check mark? If you have never used it, never seen it, never bothered investigating it, will you click on the red X?
Ellen, I just have to clear, every time you do that, I'm just going to clear the polls and grab the ball back. So looking at this, lots of people are saying yes to this one, just to let you know.
Well, perhaps that's because it's the most common models that's used. And it's the easiest. People are more comfortable with that. So thank you, Julie.
Would you like, and you've got the ball back to keep on moving. There you are.
Yes. You want to go to the next slide for me, Julie?
Yes, I gave you the ball back too, so just to give you a heads up.
Okay. Did it move?
Yes, we have now.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Team teaching, great, great, great. Team teaching resembles that tag team approach in wrestling. Both teachers share in planning and instructional delivery and in monitoring the students. Both educators share equally in the responsibility for instruction, and both have an equal status in the classroom. This co-teaching approach is affected more than any other by individual teaching styles. A good example of team teaching is while one teacher does the directed teaching, the other teacher simultaneously demonstrates note-taking skills on the board. And if you would be kind enough, please indicate if you use the team teaching model.
Oh, I see some checks coming in. That's great.
Yeah, I think of the 88 people here, I have to say of the 88 people here at the bottom, 8 have said yes and 10 have said no, not yet.
Okay, let me go on to another model then. Let's take a look at this parallel teaching. Please note that there's a teacher at each side of the room. In parallel teaching, the co-teachers jointly plan and teach the lesson to only half of the class, thereby lowering the adult-student ratio. Co-teachers must plan and coordinate so that all the students receive the exact same instruction. Half of the students face one teacher, and the other half turn their desks to face the other teacher. This model is appropriate for drill and practice, reteaching, test prep, and even projects. But I'm also aware of a co-teaching team that uses this model whenever a substitute teacher is present. Both the sub and the co-teacher implement the exact same lesson plan, but they only instruct half of the class. If you use parallel teaching or you're familiar with it, please indicate so.
So Lela, looking at this, it looks like quick polls. Thank you for everyone for being so great with these polls. I'd say that 9 people have said yes and 7 have said no, not yet. So some folks are asking good questions then about how they do in different models. So thank you for typing that in. Co-teaching, my co-teacher likes me to go to a different room to do this. Someone just shared. So just FYI, thank you. We're just moving along here.
Well, actually, Julie, that is a challenge of parallel teaching, space. If the room is too small, this parallel teaching could be difficult to implement because it could get too loud. So going to a separate room is a good option.
Great. So thank you for folks are sharing their, we have, what, 1 more minute and 3 slides to go.
Next slide.
It's up there. Thanks, Ellen.
Okay, there we go. Alternative teaching. Thank you, Julie. For alternative teaching, one teacher works with the small group for pre-teaching, for enrichment, or for reteaching, and the second teacher will work with the larger group. But for alternative teaching to be successful, the purpose as well as the membership of the small group should vary. Each teacher should take responsibility for the small group occasionally. This is good to implement when you have struggling ELs or struggling special ed students. It can also work for enrichment. Is this familiar to anyone? Have you used that?
Okay, quick poll. If you're using this, I see Jackie says yes, and I'm looking at the count here in the bottom right. Of the people, 88 people still here with us this afternoon, thank you. 10 have said yes, and 6 have said no, not yet, and some are typing into the chat some of their experiences. So half-half in yes and no in this alternative teaching model, Ellen.
I'm sorry, Julie. Say it again.
12 have said yes, 7 have said no so far.
Okay. Let's go on to the next one then. Next slide, please.
You can click it, or do you want me to click it?
I'm not able to.
Yes, you have the ball. Let me do it.
You have to move your cursor.
I'll do it. It's okay, Ellen. Over to you. Keep going.
Okay, this is the one teach, one observe, which is used on very rare occasions. One teacher is going to be providing the direct instruction while the other teacher or the support professional just observes a targeted student. It could be used to determine a student's behavior or specific academic needs, or to compare that target student to his peers before pre-referral occurs. But it's really very rare. And now station teaching. Finally, station teaching, the teachers are going to divide the content as well as the students. They're going to actually chunk the content. Students move from one teacher to another and also to an independent station according to a time schedule, say every 10 or 15 minutes. Station teaching is extremely effective as long as the lesson is not sequential or the order of instruction is not essential. Station teaching simply takes a lesson, chunks it into the 3 sections. Here's a good example. In social studies, the students will examine the geography, the economy, and the culture of a region, 3 separate stations. In language arts, the students will answer comprehension questions from a recently read story at 1 station, edit a writing assignment at the 2nd station, and finally respond to prompts using figurative language at the 3rd station. How many people have used station teaching? I imagine that this is kind of common.
Yeah, of the 87 people here with us, many, you're right, many have said yes. We're up to about 30 folks have hit the green check on this one, so thank you.
You bet. Thank you very much. Everyone needs to remember, if you're in the classroom, you are an integral part of the team. And direct instruction lesson does not preclude the other co-teacher from being actively involved. You can simultaneously model note-taking on the board during direct instruction, model the first problem on the assignment, circulate and check for homework, stamp last night's homework. Both teachers can be actively involved. So, based on this poll, have you ever used other instructional supports as a member of a co-teaching team, besides the ones that I just mentioned?
And if you have, please type into the chat. We'd love to hear about them. So if you have used other instructional supports, please type in the chat. You can see Toby's response, Ellen.
Yes, I like the idea of paraprofessionals in lieu of a second teacher. And that's really important that paraprofessionals are included and feel valued in the system, because they need to know that when they take the initiative to assist in a classroom, to assist students, that they are very, very valued.
And someone says, great visuals on the board recording student answers. Kelly writes, I think the ones you listed can and should be integrated in the models of co-teaching you described. And Dolores says, paraprofessionals to pre-teach key concepts, vocab, then review. Thank you. Erin is sharing, a lot of co-teaching happens outside the classroom doing collaboration. What happens behind the scenes is almost more important. So we're about 3 minutes behind, just
yes,
a heads up
on
time here.
I'm moving right along then, thank you. As you respond to this prompt, ladies and gentlemen, please keep in mind, co-teaching is like a marriage. It's important to have a trusted and respected partner for a successful relationship. So, if you have any questions or any information on what was just shared, please feel free to type it into the chat.
Ellen, you can see some of the chat coming up. Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Sylvia, let's move along with the Sussman Middle School Pioneers.
Oh, very excited to have this part, and we wanted to make sure we gave enough time to our teachers, our voices from the field. So today we're just really going to be, talking to Drew and Jackie about their experiences as a co-teaching team. And so we're going to just have a conversation with them. Please, if you have questions for them, type them in the chat, and we'll make sure that Drew and Jackie can address those questions. We really want to look at how they were able to use different configurations of co-teaching, some of the challenges that they're facing, some of the benefits that they have noticed with their students, and then also the benefits that they have received as teachers. So we'll move right along to our first set of questions. So Drew and Jackie, you're finally up. Which co-teaching configurations do you use?
Would you like Drew to answer it first or Jackie?
Yeah, Drew, go first.
Okay.
Are we on mute?
Drew, I can't hear you. You might want to unmute your phone, Drew.
Hello. Can you hear me?
There
Hello,
we go.
can hear you. Great.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, listen, real quickly, my name is Drew Belatoff over at Sussman and Downey, which is in Southern California, and I teach 7th grade, been teaching 15 years, and team teaching for a few of those. And in regards to your question, for team teaching, the configuration that I use is oftentimes station teaching. I like having, as Ellen said, the other team teacher and you break the class into groups. I mean, for those of you listening, wouldn't you love to have a class with, say, like 10 students in it? Well, that's essentially what station teaching is. You know, I break my class into thirds or sometimes into halves, and we teach away. We take a group. Although we teach something, although we're teaching the same thing, we teach it with a twist or in a different way. So, like, for example, if we're teaching setting, I'm a language arts teacher, I might go over setting in the sense of place or location, like the physical setting, where my partner might be teaching to their group about setting in the sense of time, like whether it's set in the Old West or the prehistoric era. So both are getting the lesson on setting, just a different facet to it. And like Ellen mentioned, that is good when it doesn't really matter what order you get the lesson in. You know, when you're teaching, the phones are ringing a lot, kids are coming in late, getting called to the office. There always seems to be something going on that's a cause for distraction. And it's really nice to have the team teacher there. Going back to the one teach, one assist, I know the presenter mentioned that it's sometimes overused, but the reality is it's so helpful to kind of have a teacher roaming around putting out all those fires and neutralizing some of the behaviors out there or problems that come up. And that other teacher who normally would have to stop cold in their tracks and take that phone call or address that student or whatever just continues going. You know, I found that my team talk classes are usually ahead in the curriculum, and I think it's for that reason.
Well, that's a great benefit that, you know, I think teachers need to hear that, because they think, oh gosh, you know, how will we fit this all in and make it all happen? So it's great to hear you share that, you know, when you're doing station teaching, you're finding that you're getting ahead of everyone else. So Jackie,
Absolutely.
You're up.
Okay, I really enjoyed the team teaching model as well, because I liked that when we did this model, both my co-teacher and myself were engaging the class at the same time. For example, if we were going over like vocabulary words the students were learning, we could switch off like every other one or every 2 words, and then the kids would get used to the different transitions and address the different learning styles that the kids might have, as well as different perspectives of words that are being presented. Each person would give a different take on their definition or how it pertains to their life or different experience, those total types of words, so it would give the kids a different perspective. I also picked station teaching because I liked when using this for like quiz review or test review. I also teach in a math, I co-teach in a math class as well, so we did that when we broke the kids up into either 2 or 3 stations, and it was nice to be able to review with one group, one concept that's going to be on the test, and have my co-teacher review another concept and then have them do one independently. So it worked really nice.
So what I've heard is, you know, station teaching was definitely, and I know having worked in Downey a little bit, station teaching was kind of that step away from one teach, one assist, kind of to the next level, and that you found that it really is very effective, but that you also team teach as well, is what I've heard.
Right.
Okay, great. Well, then let's move on then to the next question, which, you know, as co-teachers, we heard some positive things, and the fact that, wow, you know, you can actually get more content in a smaller amount of time, which I know everyone teaching the Common Core is up against a wall and getting that in. But what's the challenge that you face as a co-teaching team?
One challenge that I
came up with was that if you're used to working by yourself when you're approaching this co-teaching team strategy, you need to be open to the co-teaching model and concept. You really have to be willing to share your classroom with another teacher because they're there every day, certain periods, working with the kids in your classroom, sitting in your chair, things like that. It's just reality. As well as share the planning of lessons and teaching those lessons, which can be really hard for some people because they don't want to let go or they want to do it their way, so you have to be really receptive to that. And you really do work closely with another person. I believe that you truly have to be comfortable with that other teacher so that the co-teaching model can be successful. And as the RSP teacher, you also have to be able to monitor your students more closely in the general ed classroom so that they do not fall far behind. In our schedule, we have a study skills class where I could take those certain tasks or things they were struggling with and reteach it during a 6th period, like at the end of the day, so that they wouldn't fall so far behind.
I kind of want to second what Jackie said. In many ways, I have those same sentiments. I think the first thing that comes to mind is establishing some ground rules, and I mean between the two teachers. So every rule you have or any norm or standard you have as a classroom teacher will have to be reanalyzed. And I'm sure some teachers who think like, wow, I finally got this teaching thing down, and now I need to change things around to accommodate another teacher. But you'd be surprised. I mean, I had some rules that really amounted to dogma, and my team teacher showed me things like, for example, even though I don't have the same team teacher now at my current assignment, I still use some classroom like standards that were put in place by her because on reflection they were better. So the challenge can be made into a good thing. You just need to be willing to re-scrutinize pretty much all your practices.
And I will agree that, you know, that taking the time to develop some common agreements, to reflect on your own practice, and then, you know, taking what you even say was, you know, your dogma for your class, taking that out of your head, putting it on a piece of paper, and then talking to your partner about it is real essential to building that relationship. Can you tell us a little bit about your co-planning time? How do you make that happen?
Well, one thing, and this plays into your question about a challenge, is some challenges are through no fault of your own. They're systemic or they're site-based. For example, there was a time when my team teacher and I had different common planning periods. So, well, they weren't common planning periods. We didn't have any time allocated to us to touch base and plan. And this was just a fiat of how the scheduling was made at our campus. When it became apparent that, you know, that was a problem, our school worked, our counselors worked with us, and now I have a common planning period with my team teacher. So part of the problem is going to be getting other stakeholders on board. Counselors, principals, you'd be surprised. A lot of these professionals, they don't really get the problems a team teacher has, and so you might need to advocate for your team really in building in some planning time. Otherwise, it could be hard to come by.
Drew, your concern about not having common planning time is not unique to your school or even your district. More than often than not, the master schedule is the tail that wags the dog. And in order to find collaboration time, you need the support of your counselors, your administration, and you need to impress upon them how critical it is that you do have that common planning time. So that is not just a local issue, that is statewide, maybe even national. The master schedule controls what's going on.
Yeah, Great. Well, thank you, and I think those, you know, as people are listening in, especially those that are thinking about, you know, getting started with some collaborative teaching and co-teaching, that it is important to do that develop those common agreements early on. And I think, Jackie, then you mentioned that, you know, you have that extra support period where you can provide that pre-teach, reteach, and I think that's real important as you're thinking about scheduling. And Aaron had asked about elementary school scheduling, and keeping some time in the day to get to work on those specific skills that not all students need, but some of them do, to continue to be successful in that classroom. But let's talk about how the students have benefited. How, what have you seen as far as the students and being in your co-taught class?
That question has many parts to the answer, and I really don't know where to start, but I'll tell you this much. I've been team teaching for several years now, and I've found, and this is consistent, that my team taught classes outperform my non-team taught classes. And as you can guess, my non-team taught classes are general ed only. And when I say outperform, I mean that they usually are an easier group to work with. Personality-wise, I find them to, for whatever reason, to be a little bit more motivated, and I'm sure that in some ways ties back to being a team teacher. And they get better grades. Sometimes I'm grading a stack of papers from the whole entire day's worth, and I think to myself, wait a second, which class is this? And I'll thumb through it and I'll see, this special ed class is really doing a lot better than my general ed class. So I feel that students benefit from just getting a far more richer learning experience. I mean, for me, the proof is in the results I've seen in the years I've been doing it, when comparing it to my non-team taught classes.
Well, that is great to hear.
Yeah. A benefit that I see as co-teaching is that the students are given more than one way to look at something. When you co-teach, you have two teachers that have different teaching styles, and so they are being exposed to the information in a couple different ways. And this also ensures that all students are being reached in the different ways that the information is being presented. Some students will learn better from one teacher and vice versa. It's always good to be able to have two teachers in the classroom, so if students need help, the one that is not directly helping the students or teaching them can pull some students aside and help them understand the concepts further if further teaching is required. Also, students have even said that they like having two teachers because they like the transitions between the different teachers, and they also like that it changes it up a little and makes it more interesting for the students. So I've had students say that they like having more than one teacher in the class.
And when we go back to Universal Design for Learning and we look at student engagement, I mean, we just know it is more engaging for them. One, you have different styles, you have, different personalities, and that they get to switch that up as they go through the day is truly a benefit. And when we did our dress rehearsal, I think, Drew, you had mentioned that one of the things that that had benefited you both was, just being able to share your own resources as well. So I think as teachers you found that benefit, and I don't want to take Ellen's question from her, so I'll pass the ball to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Sylvia. Well, Jackie and Drew, tell me, how has co-teaching benefited you as a teacher? Besides having another adult in the classroom and having a lower student-teacher ratio, what are some of the other benefits for teachers?
Well, just like she had mentioned, resources is big. So, some schools, like, it's hard to come by things at certain times in the year. Sometimes I need, like, poster paper or markers or printer cartridge or whatever it is. And it's kind of neat with that team teacher. We basically have twice the resources. We have maybe different budgets to pull from. Everything in my cabinets, all my art supplies, all my paper, everything is up for grabs, and the same goes with her. And so really, it's like the kids have 2 times the material at their disposal. And that helps the teacher a lot and the students. Also, let's face it, like, some of these classes are really difficult. The kids are a little bit squirrely and falling out of their seats, and you can't say enough about having that other teacher in the room. And Ellen, I know you mentioned besides that, but I just want the listeners there to know that that could be life-changing for them as teachers, and really change like the look and feel of their teaching day. I know it has for me. And also, and I mentioned this, I alluded to this a little bit, is you get to see someone else at work. You know, we work in a profession where we rarely ever see anybody doing this job. We really do work alone, so to speak. And as a team teacher, you're going to see how someone else treats the exact same problem that you might have. For better or for worse, you're going to see another style, and it's going to affect you. It might reaffirm those things that you always felt were a bad idea, and it might show you new good ideas. But it's going to shape you, and if you are open-minded about it, its biggest benefit is going to be it's going to make you a better teacher ultimately, whether you continue to team teach or not.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Drew on that. I think that it has also opened up my eyes to dozens of other perspectives and ways of just teaching different concepts. And it's like you said, it makes you a better teacher, and things you might never have thought to teach that way, now you're doing it that way. I think that it also helps teachers expand their repertoire on how to teach students. I think that teachers can learn from each other, obviously, and it was always nice to have another teacher in the room with me, because if you miss a step or if you forget to say something or remind them about something, like, oh, we have a quiz on Friday, oh, I forgot to say that, the other teacher can always step in and say, oh, guys, don't forget we have a quiz on Friday. So it's always like two brains are better than one kind of thing, I guess. Yeah, that's what I really liked about co-teaching.
Well, I think in addition to increasing your own teaching repertoire and your own bag of tricks, I would like to mention that I think it benefited both of these fabulous teachers because it raised their professional status on campus. The administration at Sussman Middle School is tremendously supportive of the co-teachers, and generally speaking, whenever I go to the office and ask for a different perk for the co-teachers, either to be released early or to have additional supplies or to have the lights in their room repaired, the administration is very, very compliant because they appreciate so much what Jackie and Drew do on campus, as well as the other teams of co-teachers at Sussman. So, any other questions, any other concerns that you would like to share? Jackie and Drew?
Drew?
Well, I think we hit the main ones that come to mind. Maybe just as a footnote, really quickly, I'd mention it's kind of nice when a teacher is absent, whether it be for training or whatever, because there's the other teacher there, and so you're not going to get this business of kids, you know, pretending they don't know what's going on or giving the sub a run, you know, the run around as to where they left off or whatever. If there's one teacher absent, it's pretty much business as usual, and the kids know that. And in this day of professional development, when teachers are pulled a lot, that's really helpful.
Thanks very much, Drew. You know, Sylvia mentioned the inequality of opportunity that many of our special needs students had when they were in self-contained classrooms in an isolated setting. By implementing co-teaching, many of our students are able to have access to the Common Core. And for that reason, the Common Core has brought out the very best in a lot of the teachers as well as the students, and it has become an issue whereby all students should have the opportunity at least to be exposed to the Common Core and learn. So we've talked about many of the benefits of co-teaching, and Jackie and Drew shared many of the benefits for the students as well as the teachers. Please type in any of the benefits our current co-teachers have experienced. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go to the next slide and talk about some of the next steps in co-teaching for those of you who have concerns or questions about co-teaching. And of course, the first one is discuss it with your administrator. You absolutely have to have support from your administrator so that you can arrange for professional development opportunities as well as the alignment of that master schedule that I mentioned earlier. Be sure to ask for help, necessary materials, and time for planning and collaboration. Without that, you're going to be struggling and you're going to be frustrated. Furthermore, be proud of yourself. You're taking the challenge of improving instruction for all students. And for many of our special needs students, not only will their behavior improve in a co-taught class, but their self-esteem will also improve. You're giving them an opportunity to learn. There are many co-teaching resources that we've included in this webinar. If you have any questions or concerns about those resources, you can either type your question into the chat box. I'm looking at the time, and I'd like to keep moving along in honor of your time commitment, but I want to make sure that your questions will be answered.
And I saw a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Sylvia, please.
Well, I saw a question from Aaron, and I'm thinking that you know, he's probably at an elementary school, and you know, how do you find time to plan and collaborate on a regular basis? And my background was, you know, elementary RSP, and so, you know, struggled with that same thing, and did not have really that benefit of weekly planning time, but the teachers did have, you know, once a month, they would have a release day planning day, and so I advocated for myself to have that same planning time, you know, at least for part of that day, and they knew, you know, I was going to be there from, you know, 2 o'clock to 3:30, and that was a time when we could plan kind of long-term what our co-teaching lessons would be. And so it allowed me to have that input in the planning so that we could use some of that universal design for learning in planning it. Oh, we've got this project coming up, and these are the activities that we're going to do. And they would be kind of creating the unit guides, and I would get to be part of that. And then on a weekly basis, and this isn't ideal, but on a weekly basis, then I would get those lesson plans, and I did encourage that through Chocolate. I got those lesson plans in my box. So that then I could, before the week began, I would get an idea. If I had questions, I could run after school and say, hey, you know, what are we doing here in science? Well, you said research. What do you mean? What am I going to do as I'm coming in? I'm not going to say it was ideal, but it was doable in a system where I did not have a prep period on a regular basis. So I think another way to do it is on an early release day. I could wear my roller skates, and when all grade levels were planning, I could go to those grade levels where I was co-teaching and be there for part of that planning time. Say on a 2.5-hour Wednesday release day, I would spend some time at 4th grade, 5th grade, and 3rd grade, because those were the main classes where I was co-teaching, and not so much in language arts, but in science and social studies. So it takes a lot of creative thinking, and I think it's thinking about, instead of having the kids come to you, it was more of a, you know, now I got to wear my running shoes because I'm going to them. And that's what scheduling was like as well. You know, maybe I'm not in that class for the whole period, but I am there for 45 minutes every day. And so we plan the lesson for the station teaching part to happen in the 45 minutes that I'm there in your 2-hour language arts block, so that we can do that smaller group instruction. But I'm hoping I got 2 of your questions answered, Aaron.
Aaron says thanks for that. And there was one question about making, again, I think for you both, the connection between the co-teaching and the implementation of the Common Core standards. I know that you said it once, Ellen, but is there anything, you know, just more explicit that you want to add about that, as Michelle asked that question?
Well, I mean, the explicit piece is that those students are receiving the fullness of, you know, the Common Core instruction in that general ed classroom. And, you know, I can go back to even when I was a special day class teacher, there is no way I can teach with multiple grades in my room. All of the minutes required for every grade level in Common Core in 1st through 3rd. And so it really is an impossible task. And for those of you who are in that position, I mean, you truly, your hands are tied in being able to deliver the Common Core at the depth that it is supposed to be delivered. And that's why co-teaching is a way to allow those students that access to the Common Core that in a segregated classroom you really can't do.
I just had one comment here that someone sent, which is one of my comments was the simplification and access of instruction is subtly different for assessment, so keep that in mind. Also, the use of formative assessment practices throughout instruction can provide value information for addressing individual learner needs. So can you talk a little bit about that assessment piece in this conversation?
Well, and I think if you go and watch the videotape or the video of the co-teaching styles, the Maryland Learning Links, you'll see in that one high school class where the teachers recognized just through their own classroom formative assessment, students were supposed to be writing a paragraph, that they were not able to do that independently and were able to move it into a parallel teaching situation so that those students would get that smaller group instruction that they needed in order to move ahead with that particular lesson and meet that standard. So, I think that formative assessment piece allows, because you have now two teachers in the room, you can provide that small group instruction that really is very difficult to do otherwise. So it's another way that we can provide that greater access.
Thank you. I'm just asking if there's any final questions here as we end up today. Do you see anything in the chat that I've missed? Let me know. Someone says, we're wondering how to adapt the Common Core standards for different levels in one classroom. We know co-teaching is excellent strategy for sharing ideas and groups, and I think they're just asking for ways of implementing the standards at different levels. I think that was perhaps, is that something we can cover in the next minute or so and as we draw? Maybe that's a longer conversation.
I think that's a longer conversation. I know that several mentioned using Goalbook, and it's more than just the Goalbook because it really does focus on how you can access the standards at different levels. So, I mean, I would say as a resource out there, that might be a place to look to get some, just some ideas on how they have done that.
Thank you. And then Erin's sharing some pieces. So we're coming to an end. Jackie and Drew, do you want to have a final thought as we move along? Ellen shared resources, and any final thoughts as we end off today's presentation? To thank you, Ellen and Sylvia and Jackie and Drew for being our presenters and panelists. Drew, you first. Any thoughts as you end today? And Jackie, how about you?
I just wanted to say that with the whole, if you have the special ed students in a general ed class, if you raise the bar for them, and I know sometimes they'll struggle, but if you raise that bar 99% out of 100 times, they're going to reach that goal that you set for them, and they'll achieve what you set for them. So I know sometimes people say, oh, it might be too hard, or oh, they're struggling. But when you raise that bar 99% of the time, they're going to reach it. So just keep doing what you're doing. Hope those good.
Thank you. And Drew, I see you back online with us. Okay, Sylvia, and thank you, Ellen, you shared the benefits of co-teaching on this slide, and I think we've heard those. We're wrapping up. Ellen, thank you for sharing the next steps in co-teaching and the resources. All of these information will be as part of the chat. We have the archive posted for you. We have a final reflection, and we really appreciate how much time you've given today in the chat, sharing your own practices and questions. And we're just going to put that forward as we wrap up for today. Please put that slide up again. Chris, which slide do you mean? We will go back. We'll ask this reflection question, resources. I will ask you perhaps to download the PowerPoint and put where you can get the video clips and PowerPoint, and you can watch and get the resources on your own time, and we'll also be doing a list of those that were shared in the chat. So just final reflections on how co-teaching can support students in accessing the Common Core, what jumped out at you, what was reconfirmed for you, and how can this practice provide scaffolds to meet the standards. So any thoughts you have, final thoughts, please feel free to share them. It's been a long day for you all. We really ask Ellen, would you like to do the final comments as we end up today? We'll invite you back to more webinars. We have a Vimeo channel where we record these so you can share them with your colleagues back in the classroom. And this is the contact information for our presenters today for follow-up questions. And we thank you for being part of today's webinar. So Ellen and Sylvia, as our panelists, facilitators, do you have final thoughts as we end off today?
Well, I did just put in the chat, you know, if there were questions that you did not feel get answered, or, you know, if you're dealing with the logistics of, you know, an RSP teacher at a school with 5 grade levels, I mean, I definitely email me, and you know, we can continue that conversation. I'm definitely open to this. This is my passion, because as Jackie said, I think, you know, the higher we set the bar, the higher our kids will jump, and, you know, the real world is out there waiting for them, and we have to prepare them for it.
Thank you. And Ellen?
I would like to thank everyone for participating so actively in this webinar. I think it's just, it speaks to your professionalism that you would participate in this webinar, as well as want to improve your own practice in the hopes that your students will also improve and benefit from your taking this time. So I think that was wonderful.
So I just want to thank you all for being with us. We will push out a survey to get your feedback. Thank you, Sylvia, for putting your email contact for follow-up questions. The archive will be posted on the Schools Moving Up site, and it also will be in the channel for the Secondary Literacy Partnership. If you signed up today, we'll add you to our newsletter so you get the announcements about the next webinar coming up on January 1st, as well as the storage and lots of archives from previous webinars. And we want to thank you for all the wonderful work that you all do and out there on behalf of our students. And as we wrap up, we'll push out the survey and thank everyone for being here today, and for the great work you do. So thanks so much, and if you want to stay along, the chat will be recorded, and if you have any final questions about how to access that, let us know. Tracy says we would like some more examples applying CC to moderate to severe student K-12, and
that's for Julie. I said, yeah, that they should email me. There are some great resources out there for Common Core standards alignment for moderate to severe students. So great things being developed in North Carolina and in Utah, and I can always send people some links to those resources.
Thank you, Sylvia. So we'll put your email back in there, and if you see those, Sylvia, you can also send them to us, and we can include them in our newsletter and with follow-up resources for this event. So we're down to 1 minute. Please, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your time. Thank you from the Voices from the Field, and thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, participants, for being here. And we're now officially ending today's webinar. Give us your feedback and keep up the great work. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Drew and Jackie. You guys were really important to have on today. We appreciate it. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Julie, Anu.
Thank you all.